So think back 2 weeks ago. What were we learning?
We're building a chat app, right?
We were building the chat app. What framework are we building that in?
React.
React. What React concepts have we learned so far?
For me, what stands out the most is the whole reusing components thing.
Yeah, so we've got reusable components. We are learning how to make our own functional components. We are learning a little bit about the ES6 module system. That is how we can import and export files and define components in other files and use them in our own. How do we get information into components? Kind of like parameters, but they're called something different in React. What do we call that when we pass data into a component? What do we use?
That state.
Not state. It's very similar to state. And oftentimes we pass a value that's in state into a component, but there is another name for it. It's not a parameter. It is a.
Is it a prop?
It's a prop, short for property, right? So we use props to pass in information into the component. So they're commonly used. For example, we had our outgoing message, right? And we wanted that message to be styled the exact same way, but every message is going to have its own different value in it, right? It's different content. So what we do is we say, hey, we're going to reuse this component, but we're going to pass in the content of that component, what should show up inside of it, as a property. We also played around with timestamps and a couple different ways that we can access props using object destructuring or the props value directly. Someone mentioned state. Why do we use state?
That's we have one constant place to store our data.
Exactly. Yeah, we use state whenever we've got data that may be updated down the line, right? So we use state to store all of our messages. And then when we sent a new message, we were able to update our state. And because of that, our components automatically re-rendered and showed the new value in that state. Anything else from last or 2 weeks ago that we learned that we should recap or touch on just a little bit?
This is really off topic. But my week 11 quiz on Canvas isn't even loading for me. I kind of want to take it. I was playing catch up, so I was like, I want to take this quiz, but yeah, it's not loading for me.
Canvas can be a little persnickety sometimes. Let me just see.
believe that week was APIs and there wasn't a quiz. He put in a quiz, but there wasn't a quiz, so there's nothing in it. So everybody got just 5.
Okay.
Yeah, I find the same. So there is nothing there. So
That does seem to be the problem. So I will. It won't let me unpublish it. Okay, that should no longer be a problem. I've gone ahead and hidden that. There is a week 13 quiz. And let me make sure, yes, that does have questions loaded into it. So the problematic quiz has now been deleted. If you just refresh the assignments page, it should disappear. But week 13 should still be on there for you guys.
And on your week 13, you also have a week 12, day 4.
Week. What is week 12, day 4?
It was just named wrong. Instead of week 13, day 4, it says week 12, day 4.
Got it. Let me fix that as well.
I have no idea.
We got it. Edit and 13. And that has now been fixed as well. Thank you guys for that. Anything else? Well, the good news for you guys is tonight is all going to be somewhat of a review. We may even end early tonight, although I am notorious for saying that and never actually ending early. However,
Crazy. Oh,
we are going to focus all on a homework
sorry.
review. Um,
Sorry, but they're about to start. Try not to be loud.
So what we are going to be doing is we are going to be reviewing a couple homework assignments. We're going to start with the to-do list app. And for once, I will not be doing a live share. And I'm going to ask you guys not to follow along, right? Because I think a lot of you guys are getting to the point of realizing, hey, my code works, but that's not actually the most important thing. The most important thing is understanding why our code works, right? What are we trying to tell the computer here? So we're going to go all the way back to our to-do list app, and we're going to do the homework. And I'm going to suggest that you guys don't try and follow along and do it yourselves. Just listen to how it's working, right? And it may be a good idea to grab a notebook or open up a new text file, right? And just jot down notes of why is that working? How did we accomplish that? I worked with Alba not only before the break, but right after the break. And what we did is we went through and we said, hey, let's kind of pseudo code out what we're trying to get it to do. Because if we go right to that JavaScript, we're going to get tripped up in syntax or we're going to get wrapped around something. So let's break it down and say, what are these 4 steps that we're going to accomplish? And then go step by step and make sure that's done. We're then going to move over to the New York Times, and we're going to do that New York Times assignment, right? We're going to do that together, and then you can take whatever you have learned, the steps from that, and try and apply it yourself. The New York Times, we kind of treat as a midterm project. And the reason we do that is there's so much that we've built up to get you guys to get to that, right? Our HTML, our CSS, our JavaScript with the document object model, the API calls, for loops, all of that stuff, destructuring an object and being able to nest into it. The reason why we make that kind of a capstone project or a midterm project is that it is bringing in all of those concepts and making sure we understand what we're trying to get the computer to do, and we can explain out our own code. And that's really the pinnacle of understanding, right? A lot of people look at that and they go, well, does it work? And if it works, my code must be right. Well, it's not just understanding that the computer is being able to run it. The more important thing is that you could explain that to someone else, right? You could pull someone else in and say, hey, this is JavaScript. This is what each little section of my code is doing. So we're going to practice doing New York Times. We're going to do that assignment together. And then we're going to finish up the evening with doing our project, our New York Times project in React. So if you guys have not turned in your New York Times homework assignment yet, you guys are actually going to have the option of either doing it in vanilla JavaScript, the way Ryan taught it, or you're going to have the ability to also do that in React and learn about how we would use state and the render and reusable components in order to pull off that homework assignment. So if you have not turned in your homework assignments yet, this is going to be a good opportunity to go along for the ride and then catch up over the course of this week and try and do it on your own. However, like I said, I'm going to encourage that you don't follow along coding things out and instead just try and take notes, at least for today. Tomorrow, we'll be back in the normal swing of things. We'll be building a new application out and kind of going from there. But we're going to start all the way back at our first React app, and that's going to be our to-do list. And we're going to work on that homework assignment together. So all of that said, do we have any questions before we dive in here? All right. Give me 1 second to pop open my code, and then we can dive right on in.
You're not sharing your screen. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, there we go. My computer is fighting me. Sorry, I was getting my file set up. Okay, so in my week 14, day 1, I have created our to-do, and that is resuming where we left off. So a good reminder for everyone, when we are working in static HTML, CSS, and vanilla JavaScript, we've been using that go live button, right? But now we have gotten a little bit more complex. Because we're using React apps, we need to start that up in the terminal. So in order to do that, we're going to right click, we're going to open an integrated terminal, and I'm going to run my command npm start. If you ever get this React scripts command not found, it's probably because your node modules hasn't been downloaded, installed, and initialized. So in order to fix that, I ran npm I, which is a shortcut for npm install. That went in and went ahead and installed a bunch of things for me. So now when I run my npm start, it's going to pop open in a new tab, my localhost 3000. Okay, so before we ever add new functionality, we kind of want to review and make sure we understand the existing functionality. And I always like to start from the user perspective. So we come in here, I see an input and I see a button. Before I even click on the button, I want to go find that code. So we go over to SRC. App.js is kind of our highest level, right? That's what contains everything. And I see all of this stuff up here, and I'm going to just ignore that. I'm going to say, all right, let me find the input and the button, because that's what I see as the user. That's what I want to make sure I remember where that code is. So I come down here, I see a form, and I see my input and my button. Okay, that lines up with what I see over here. So now we want to take it a step further. From the user perspective, I'm going to say task 1 and hit add task. And that shows up here. And I'm going to come back over here and say, okay, how is that working? We've got the value and we've got an on change. What's that on change doing? That's saying, hey, when the text is updated, go get the target coming from the event, extract the value of it, and set that into our new task. Okay, well, where's set new task coming from? That's coming from our state up here. Based off of that state, we are updating that whenever that letter is typed in, whenever that input changes, set that into new task. Well, why do we do that? That's because we can't update new task directly. That breaks the rule of state in React, right? So in order to update our state, we always use that set function in order to set the new value of it. Okay, so new task is in here. Whenever that gets updated, the value of the input is also updated. Okay, well, why do we need to do all of that? Because when we submit the form, it triggers form submitted. Form submitted comes up on our JavaScript side of the component, and it says prevent the default browser action. Don't refresh the screen. We're going to take care of that form submission ourselves. Then we set tasks. Okay, well, that's kind of interesting because all we really want to do is add the new task to the end of the state. However, we can't use that push function like we normally use because push modifies the original array. We don't really want to do that. So what we do is we say, hey, go take the existing tasks and spread that out into a new array. Then take a new task, which is coming from our state, which was set on the value of the input, and add that to the end of our array. Then finally, console log out the new task. Okay, well, we come over here, we see my task 1 is working. Why is that working? Because set tasks is linked to my tasks up here. What that means is if I come down here, I can see that I'm mapping over my tasks. What does map do? It's just another kind of a loop. It gives us access to each individual task. And what we're doing is we're creating a list item for every item in the tasks array, and we're including the task, the content of it. Okay, pausing there. Do we have any questions about how this is currently working? It's been over 2 weeks, I think, or almost 2 weeks since we've worked on this last. Do we have any questions about the flow of all of this?
Could you scroll up, please? Thanks, I didn't know how much I was missing.
No problem. Feeling good about this flow?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so our assignment was that we needed to add a done button over here. And when you click the done button, we wanted this task to show up as crossed off. So I like to think about this like I normally do from the user perspective. What needs to show up in order for them to mark something as done? Well, we need a done button to show up. So I come over here and I say, okay, this list item is coming out for every task. So I could come down here and add a button that says done. So if I come over here, I get my done button showing up, but if I hit add a task 2, my done button is still down here. And I'm like, wait, when I click done, is it going to mark task 2 as done or task 1 is done? Okay, so that's not going to work. What we need to do is make a done button for each list item. So what we can do is just take that done button and move it directly inside my list item. Now, because it's inside my map, what's going to happen is every time it generates a new list item, it's going to include the done button for us. Okay. Cool. Now what's the next user thing? Well, when I click on that button, I want this task to be marked as done. All right, well, we kind of know how to do that. I'm going to say const mark as done. And mark as done is just going to console log done clicked. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to add my on click. This is our React JSX syntax. It's what's bridging our gap between our JavaScript and our HTML. And I'm going to say mark as done. So I come over here, I'm going to pop open my console to make sure it's still working. I click on done and I get done clicked. Okay, so that means our on click was linked. I come back over here. If I click on my first one, I get done linked. If I click on my second one, I also get done clicked. Now we've got a problem. How do I know which done button is getting clicked? How do I know which task to cross off? Does anyone have an idea of how we could go about knowing which done button was clicked?
We have to list them and choose them like an array, not an array, an index.
Yeah, we do have to use that index, right? Down here, when we're looping over all of the tasks, we already know we have access to that index. So wouldn't it be cool if we could, in our mark as done, pass through this index so when it gets to mark as done up here, it knows what index was marked as done? What would we use in JavaScript to pass that information into the function? How do we pass information into a function?
Is it like the dot? It's similar to the dot push, I think.
You mean like arguments or a parameter?
Arguments and parameters. So what happens down here is because this function does not have any parameters, we can tell React, hey, go run mark is done. However, when we want to pass in additional parameters, we actually have to move this into its own anonymous function. So what we do is we say on click, go run this function. And this function is going to go run mark as done, and it's going to pass in the index. Okay, so I save that. I come back up to my mark as done, and I've got to tell it, hey, you're going to have an index passed into you. Okay, well now I can say done clicked number and add in the index to see what's happening. So I come back over here, I hit my done button, and I get done clicked number 0. Well, that's kind of odd, but we're expecting that, right? We know indexes start at index 0 and add up from there. And if I hit my done button here, now I know, hey, my second done button was clicked at index 1, and we can even test that a little bit more and hit done, and now I get done clicked number 2. Okay, so if you're taking notes, if you're keeping track of what we've accomplished so far, we have created a new function called mark as done. We've added a new button. On that button, we've added an on click, and we made a new function in here to add index as an argument. So up here, we get access to the parameter of index, so we know which done button has been clicked. Any questions on that?
No, but now we have to get it. So we have to get it to say done 1, 2, 3 instead of 0, 1, 2, 3.
Not the 0, 1, 2, or 3 that I'm worried about. The functionality that I'm shooting for is I would like this to be crossed off if the item is done.
Okay.
So we do have to use that 0, 1, 2. We have to use this index here. And what we're trying to do is update our tasks. But now we've got a problem because our tasks, if we look at what's getting added, it's new task. Well, new task is a string. I want to keep track of whether or not that task was done or not, in addition to the name of that task. What data type do I need to move this to in order to keep track of that?
An object.
An object. So what I'm going to do is when I add a new task, I'm going to move it into an object. And I'm going to say the name of the new task is whatever the value is. And then I'm going to say done is false. Well, why? Well, when I add a new task, I don't want it to be done yet. I'm going to default it to false, and then I can click the button to make it true. So I save that. I come over here, I refresh, I type in ABC, I hit add task, and I get a white screen. Where'd my input go? Where did everything go? Well, whenever React doesn't like what is being rendered, it just turns everything to a white screen and gives you some information about why only in the console. So if I come down here, you can see I've got an error that says objects are not a valid as a child. Found object with keys name and done. Okay, well, that should be giving me a hint. It's something to do with this. I just changed this. Let's go down and see where my tasks are being used. All right, I'm mapping over all the tasks. That shouldn't be a problem. I'm just looping over the object. But down here, I say throw in the whole object now of task. Well, I don't want the whole object to show up. I want the task name to show up. So I come over here, I refresh, that clears my console out. Now when I say ABC, and I can say 1, 2, 3, now I'm back to normal. What I did is because I updated the data type when I add a new task, I also have to update the rendering of that task to display the key that I want. So in order to get the task name value out, I need to specify .name. Okay, so we've updated that. We've got this good placeholder for done. We need 2 more steps here. What's the first step?
So now don't we need to set something to true when it is done?
We sure do. We've got done as false up here. We would like to set this to true. And we've already done the hard work of knowing which done button was clicked on. So I'm going to come in here and should be pretty easy, right? I can say tasks, go get whatever index was clicked on, get done, and set it to true. So I come over here, I refresh, I type in ABC, I type in 1, 2, 3, I click the done button, and I get done clicked number 1. Okay, let's see if that's working. I'm going to come back over here. and I'm going to console log out my tasks. I'm going to add in, I'm going to click the done button. I pop open my array here and I've got number 2. I clicked on that and I've got my done set to true. So all that appears to be working. Emphasis on the appears. What's the last step we need to do here?
The line through it.
You got it. So we come down here and you guys are used to seeing style with these quotes, right? React does things a little differently though. Instead of the style tag being a string of CSS, it allows you to use an object instead. The reason it does that is it allows you to use some concepts like inline ternararies in order to affect your styling. So in React, just like we have to use class name instead of class, in React, we can use style, but we do have to make it an object. Once we make it our object, we can do something like text decoration. And you'll notice we don't use a dash in there like we would in CSS. React does that conversion for us. So instead, we now use camel casing. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, if the task is done, then show it as a line through. Otherwise, inherit whatever the default state is. Otherwise, don't really add any text decoration. So I'm going to save that. I come over here, I refresh, I type in ABC, I hit done. Well, what happened?
You don't
I'm
Right.
gonna look in here. My done got set to true. Oh, that's weird. Let me try and add. Whoa, that just crossed off. Something's really funky here. If I add a new task, it's not crossed off. And if I hit done, it's not crossed off. And I come over here and I type one more letter and it shows off as crossed off.
Hmm.
We broke a rule somewhere. What rule did we break of React?
We need to update with the tasks,
Well, we did right here. We just set that to done.
but we need to add the. I forgot what it's called.
You were right. We went to our tasks. Where are our tasks? They're in state. We're never allowed to update state unless we update it with the set tasks function. Because set tasks is what is triggering this return to rerun and show us that the text decoration should show up as a line through. So really what's happening here is that when we add in our task, ABC and 1, 2, 3, we are actually setting that item to done. But because we are not using that set tasks function, this return is not rerunning because we didn't set it properly. We modified the state directly. State is always supposed to be immutable, supposed to be unchangeable unless we use this set function. So the reason why it's not showing off crossed off until we type in a new letter up here is because when we type that new letter, text updated, run set new task is realizing that it needs to re-render and is showing the return down here. It's a really important concept to understand, right? We've got our set function, and that is what is triggering our re-render. In other words, rerunning this return to show the correct information that has changed. Okay, so we've got to be pretty close. What do we need to do in order to be able to set done to true the proper way? Well, we said we need to use this set tasks, right? So I come on down here and I say, hey, set tasks. and I want to set done to true. Oh, but I only want to do that on the index of the button we clicked on. This is really messy. I can't really set tasks to the index because then it's going to delete all my other tasks. I need some intermediary step here.
Can we create
Spread
something entirely?
We could say something like let updated tasks equal a copy of our current tasks. Whoa, here comes in our old friend, the spread operator. Take all of our tasks and spread them out into a new array. Whoa, we made a copy of tasks. So that means I can update tasks directly because I'm no longer modifying the state. I'm modifying a copy of what was stored in the state. So now I can update the index and set it to true. And because of that, I can then set my tasks back in to the state using my updated tasks.
You said how this was the copy, so does it override what was there beforehand?
It will. Anytime you call set, it will always override what was in there. The cool thing, though, is that because we made a copy of it and only changed one of the indexes, it will still have all the original information in it because we spread it out and copied it, except for the fact that whatever index got clicked on, the done got set to true. So I come over here, I'm gonna refresh to clear everything out. I say ABC, I say 1, 2, 3. If I click on either one of these, I get my done, my cross through. I can come back up here and add in additional things. And if I click on done on any one of them, they will be crossed off. Okay, let's trace through all this code to make sure we understand it. So we got our form submitted. Down here, we came down and we said, hey, we want a new done button to show up. Okay, so we're going to add in some comments here to say add new done button. Then we had to, I'm going to number this. Number 2, add new function to run when task, when button, when done button is clicked. Okay, then what did we do? We came down here and we said, number 3, add on click and pass index as a parameter or argument. Here it's an argument. When it comes up here, becomes a parameter. Okay. Now we know we had to make something marked as true. So we had to come up here and say number 4, when we add a new task, add it as an object instead of a string, and default done to false. Okay, now when we did 4, that broke everything down here because we're storing the task that got typed in a new property called name. So we had to come down here and say number 5, modify rendering of each task to include name property. Okay, so now we're rocking and rolling, everything's working again. So we come back up to our mark is done and we say, hey, we need to number 6, make a copy of the array from state so we can update a specific index. Then we, number 7, set the index of whatever button was clicked to done true. Then we, number 8, update the tasks in the array from the copy we just updated. Then final step is we come down here and we say number 9, add in style prop that uses an object and an inline ternary to display a line through the item if it is set to done. All right. Talk to me. How are we feeling about that? Not going to share this code with you guys because I still want you to take a stab at it and do your homework on your own. But this is obviously all going to be in the recording. So if you need help breaking it down step by step, hopefully you can go through these comments in the recording and figure out, hey, this is what I have to do, right? And make sure every step is working along the way, because you're never going to be able to get all 9 steps to work if you write all 9 steps at the same time. So hopefully this is a way for you guys to say, all right, what should be working after I finish step 1? Let me go test it, make sure it is. Okay, now let me come back, figure out what step 2 is, and go from there. Because as you can see, when we actually read through this from top to bottom, we went 4, 2, 6, 7, 8, 9, 5, 3. Well, if anyone tried to do that in that order, I would seriously question what planet they were from. That's not something that the human brain can do. But you guys saw how I went and approached that of, well, what's the first thing that needs to be done? The user needs to be able to click on a button. So what do? We, number 1, add the new done button. Okay, well, now that they can click on that button, what happens? Well, we need some function for them to be able to click on and run. Well, how does the computer know to run that function? Now we go to number 3. Okay, they need to add a new button. Okay, now where's number 4? That comes in up here, because we say when they click on that button, we need to be able to set something to true or false. So we added in our done false, but then number 5, that broke down here. So we had to tell it, hey, I don't want you to show up an object, that whole task object. I want you to show the task name. Okay, well, now that we're doing that, what's number 6? We have to make a copy of the tasks array. Well, why is that? Because we can't modify the state directly. Okay, well, now that we've got a copy of it, it's a copy. It's no longer in state. So we are allowed to change items in that copy. Finally, we update our state to include the updated array. And then we now have access to task.done, so we can use our inline ternary to make that line show up. Does that demystify your homework a little bit? Definitely a lot of steps in there, right? Because you look at the homework assignment and you go, I just got to cross those things off. How hard could this be? But we've got a whole list of data. We've got to change our data type. We've got to add a new button. We've got to make that interact, and we've got to update our state properly. So this is really a 9-step homework assignment for something as simple as add a done button. Feeling like React's a little less hard because we're merging our HTML with our JavaScript. We're seeing how our data structures play nicely with each other, how we can iterate over arrays and make all of those items show up. Don't want you guys to hesitate with any questions, even if you think it's a dumb question. The dumber you think the question is, the higher the chance someone else has it. any section you'd like me to re-review here before we move on? Because this is all we're doing tonight. We're just going to be reviewing these concepts.
Need to look through and see if there's anything before we go on.
So at the end of class or at break, I will post the comments and the numbers. However, they won't be in the code. So hopefully that will be a good help for you guys to understand where to put it or what goals we're trying to accomplish. Archel, go ahead.
Yeah, here's my really not a stupid question, but I'm just really curious. How long did it take you to really master these concepts?
React in particular, or programming, or what timeline or what time frame are you looking at?
Fair question. Let's say with React, what we're doing so far.
React took me probably 2.5 months to really get it. The two things that I would say added to that were, one, when I learned React, I was kind of right on that line between junior and senior developer. And one of the skills that kind of pushes you over that junior line into senior is that when you can learn new technologies and easily connect the dots and say, oh, I don't usually use tasks.map, but I use for task of tasks. And because of that, I can kind of translate that knowledge in. One thing that constantly had me tripped up is the notion of the value and the on change. Because to me, in regular HTML and JavaScript, this works with just input type text. And I thought it was astronomically stupid to have to add an on change and a value, which added additional state information up here. And then you had to write an entire separate function to update it. And I thought, this is really dumb. If I have 10 different form fields, I need 10 different things in state. This is a ton of extra code. But then I realized, oh, you get the power of controlling that render. You get the power of saying, hey, I get to keep this variable in my JavaScript side. And because of that, when I do something like submitting a form, I have access to that task in the state. So state is one of those things that I really didn't understand until I realized, hey, whenever a user does something, whether that's new data showing up on the page or whether it's them typing something in, whenever I update state, this render is going to automatically run and do everything for me without me having to use inner HTML. That light bulb went off and I went, oh, that's cool. I can keep a variable over here. It's a special variable called state. And whenever I update it, as long as I update it the right way using that set function, everything down here is going to just run. That was my kind of first light bulb moment with React. Reusable components is one that like kind of makes sense, right? We've seen that in our HTML. We've copied and pasted cards. Reusable components kind of made sense to me. I did struggle with state hoisting. If you remember back all the way to the chat app, we ran into that problem of when the message input wants to send a message, how can it go update the messages list, which is its sibling component, right? And once I realized, hey, what's happening isn't the state being reached into the messages list. What we're doing is we're moving that state up to the app, then sharing that state across both applications, both components. And so what I mean by that is in our message input, what we had in here was say, hey, add to the current messages. Wait a second. This looks familiar. We took current messages and we spread it out. That's kind of convenient because I feel like we just did that in our to-do app. We took our tasks and we spread it out into a new copy. Okay, then what did we do? Oh, we pushed to it. Why could we push to it? Because we made that copy. Then what did we do? We set that in. Okay, well, that kind of looks familiar. What did we do on the other one? We came in here, we updated whatever we needed to update, and then we set that in. So the concept that I struggled with was, well, how can I use set messages when messages list is what maps over everything? And so as soon as I understood, hey, in app.js, we're going to move all the messages up so that we can pass it back in not only to messages list, but also message input. So understanding, hey, in order to share that information across both components, we end up moving it up to the parent component, then sharing it with both of the children component using those props is what made me have a light bulb moment to realize, hey, what's getting passed in here is linked directly to our state up here. That same state is what gets passed in to our other child right here. And then the last thing that I really struggled with on learning React was learning to mix my syntax, right? I've always used JavaScript and only JavaScript files, and I've only used HTML in my HTML files. So learning, hey, these curly braces are really powerful. Those curly braces are what's going to let me break the HTML divide and use JavaScript directly in my HTML. But whenever I have one of those curly braces, I'm probably going to want to return something because that's what's going to make whatever's in those curly braces show up. And that was kind of my React journey. So I would say it took me 2 to 3 months to really feel like when I made something in React, I didn't have to go to the documentation or go look something up. But I also learned React on my own. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't know anyone else who had been using React. And because of that, I made a lot of mistakes where I went, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? And it would be something as simple as I forgot to return. So even though I was referencing this component, it didn't know, hey, that's actually what I want to show up every time you map over a message. Does that answer surprise you?
It does. I expected you to say like 2 weeks.
So I will say, if I were to go learn Angular or Vue, which are the two main competitors to React right now, I probably could learn it in 2 weeks. But that's because I'm in the same kind of class or category, right? These are React, Angular, and Vue are the 3 modern front-end JavaScript frameworks, as opposed to something like jQuery, which was the precursor to all 3 of them and the dominant framework used for 10 or 15 years before someone said, hey, everything that we're building now, all these web applications are very data heavy. There should be a better way to be able to update our HTML based off of some data that we have in our JavaScript. And that's when React was born and all kinds of stuff like that. Right? It's more important to know why we're learning something than it is what we're actually learning. And so the reason why we're learning React is because it's a more efficient way to build a full stack web application, because our front end is able to handle data and events more efficiently than in vanilla JavaScript. And if you can take that statement and say, all right, dynamic data, that's everything in state, events, that's my on click, and hey, let's solve some other HTML problems while we're at it. We can't have reusable code in our HTML, so we're going to solve that with components. And hey, it's really annoying that all of our code needs to be in one file. So we're going to save that with our import export system. And hey, it would be nice if we could write some JavaScript right in our HTML. So we're going to solve that with JavaScript. Now you've pretty much got all of React under your belt.
Makes
Any-
sense.
Yep. Any final questions on these steps that we did in our to-do app before we move on to New York Times using vanilla JavaScript?
Maybe less of a question, but just want to point out how useful something like a ternary operator is. Because like I remember a little while back, I don't know why I thought I remembered you saying that it's not good practice to use indexes like in when mapping, because there could be zany stuff. So I don't know why I thought this would be better, but when I created each task on the submission, I just like made a key with a property of like a random integer from like 1 to 1,000 or something like that. And then when I was checking, the page would be rendered, I would check to see if the event target ID matched the key ID. And obviously it didn't break because it's a very small set of circumstances, but I don't know. One thing I just wanted to, one thing to point out, that the ternary operator definitely does that in a way more efficient way, but more so to our trails kind of point is, in my opinion, a lot of the learning is just hacking and just like trying different stuff, like even if you're not sure if it's going to work, just try it to see what it does. This isn't something that's production or like at a company. So if you break it, you're not going to get fired or anything. But I feel like just even trying those concepts that we've learned in like the previous months and just doing them here, you'll find that a lot of that stuff applies here and it'll just kind of make it click more. So I hear like a lot of coders say it in different ways, like, hack stuff, break stuff, but it definitely makes sense. You just kind of use console.log like constantly and just see what the computer's telling you that you did, and I think it'll flow a little easier then.
Absolutely. Yeah, a couple things to pull apart there. One, to your point of ID, using a random int is not as hacky as you think. Once we start working in the database, we're going to revisit this to-do list app, except we're going to have an entire SQL database storing our tasks. And one of the things that almost all databases do very well is generating IDs. And so depending on what database you're using, the way it generates that ID might be a little different. So Mongo actually uses the current date and time with a random integer to generate out what looks to be a random string. And then whenever you add something new into the database, it's called inserting it into the database, it will generate out an ID for you. The same goes with SQL. The only difference is SQL or SQL does sequential IDs. So when it adds a second thing into the database, the ID number is 2. When you add a third thing in, the ID number is 3. So whenever we're working with data in the database, those IDs get generated automatically for us. And because of that, we can use that in our map. The other trick that we used is the timestamp trick, to say, hey, chances are when you add 2 tasks, they're not going to be added at the exact same millisecond of each other. So IDs can be used for date objects, right? And that can be a good way to say, if this is front end only, and I'm the only user of it, I can't add 2 tasks at the exact same time. And because of that, that can be a good ID to use as well. But it does come down to hack it together, right? And what we tried to do up here is we tried to just update our tasks directly in state, and we console logged it out and it was working. And it's like, well, why isn't that showing up as crossed off? Right? We've got our inline ternary down here. It's all updating. It's console logging out fine up here. What's going on? And then you can start thinking about, wait, that's in state. What is it about state that makes this return go rerun? What makes this update? Oh, that's whenever I call this set function, that's what's triggering it to go rerun, right? So while it looks very easy for me to be able to say, hey, this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, what we do is we try it, right? And we say, hey, is this showing the line through like I want it to? And it maybe if it's not, I'm going to go back over to my inspect, and maybe I'm going to look in here and try and find out, hey, what's my text decoration set to? What's not happening there? Let's go in here. Let's play around with that a little bit more. That homework assignment makes you think that it's going to be a 2 or 3 step solve, but in reality, it takes 9 steps to make all of that show up. So don't get overwhelmed with the number of steps. Instead, do it piece by piece. Say, all right, if I need to be able to cross out a task, I need something the user can click on. So before I even add the button, I got to figure out where to add the button. I got to figure out what the button is going to be called, and then I can figure out about what the button does. So just getting the done button to show up in the right place, that's quite literally a check off for you guys, right? Of, all right, now the done button shows up. What's next? I need to make that done button do something. So now I need to go figure out where I'm going to put that code. Once I figure that out, then I can make that code work. So even though you jump all around in your code, if you can just break it down, and that's all engineering really is of any kind, taking a big complex problem and figuring out how to break it up into small enough tasks that not only you can tell the computer how to do it, but the computer can follow it. And even though this looks like a completely crazy order to us, to the computer, it has no problem following all of that. So when we take that and we say, hey, let's not worry about the number of steps. Let's think about what we're trying to get the computer to do. Doing those steps in the right order and identifying them becomes much easier. Great points, Brian. Thank you. Anyone else before we move on? Does anyone feel like they tried this homework assignment, they were following along with me, and now are like, I still don't know how to do it? Okay. Like I said, I will post 1 through 9 in the live stream channel at the end of class. I won't post the final code, but hopefully that gives you a stepping stone. If you guys tried it and got stuck anywhere, you can try it on your own from there. Okay, I'm going to move on to New York Times here. So I am going to, in my day 1 folder, create New York Times. And I'm going to call it vanilla.js because we're also going to do it in React later tonight. So I'm going to get started with my index.html. I'm also going to create my script.js just so I can split my screen a little bit easier so you guys can follow along. I'm going to go to exclamation point enter. That's going to generate everything out for me. I'll call this NY Times. And I have to link my script up. So I'm going to say script src equals my script.js. I'm going to add a console log here that says hello. I'm going to fire up my go live because I'm not in React. I'm in vanilla JavaScript. I'm going to go into my inspect and my console. I got my hello coming out, and so I should be good to go. Those are basic steps like always. Anyone have questions about that? Okay. So first things first, whenever we use someone else's code, they don't just tell us, hey, here's the endpoint to use. They will tell us, my computer does not want to fight with me. They will tell us how to use it. Okay. No, why is that not snapping on me? There we go. So in order to find out how to use it, we need to go to their documentation. So I'm just going to do a search New York Times API, and it's going to take me right into their dev portal. And there's all kinds of information in here, but what we want to narrow down in is the books API. So we go in there and it says, here's the bestsellers list services. And this will list out all the different lists, the bestseller lists that I have access to. Okay, so I want to try and test that. So I go in here and I see, hey, here is their API URL. So I'm going to head over to Postman because we always want to test an API call before we actually make it. Then I am going to close out of whatever I have open. Do a new tab. I'm going to copy the first part of the URL. I'm going to come up here and say, I want to get all the lists and I want to get the names of all the lists. So I make sure everything looks right there. I hit send and I get failed to resolve API key, variable request query param API key, steps failed to resolve API key. What is all of that telling us?
I was gonna ask, do you not need a token for this one?
We do need the token. So I'm going to say, hey, what's happening here is the New York Times is telling me I don't have access to their API. Well, in order to get access, I can hit sign in and it's going to automatically sign me in. Obviously, I have an account created. I'm going to go to the API. I'm going to go, I think it's up here to my apps. And here I already have an app created, but we'll go through this. I'm going to create a new app and I'm going to call this cohort 4. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say, all right, there's a lot of stuff in here, but all that I really care about is their books API. So I'm going to go ahead and enable that. And then I hit save. Okay, now that gives me an app ID, a key, and the secret. But I'm like, there's a lot of information in there. I don't know what to use. So I'm going to go back to the New York Times API. And I'm going to look in their books API. And I'm going to see, does not give me any information here of what API key to use. So I'm going to go to their get started and see if I can find any of that information in there. So it's saying, okay, sign in, register apps, access API keys, select my apps, click the app in the list, view the API key in the app details tab, confirm the API key is approved. Okay, so let's go back in here. And now I'm saying, okay, this is my key. I have no idea what the secret is, but this key may be what I need. So I'm going to copy that. But I still don't really know how to use that API key. Ryan went over with you guys, you could put API keys in the body or in the get parameters or in the headers, or there are so many different ways of using API keys. I need a little bit more help. And honestly, I'm confused because I'm in this get started page and it doesn't show me where to put the API. So I'm going to go back to my documentation that shows me the books API, and I'm going to try and click on this authorize button and see what happens up there. So I'm going to say select app. There's my cohort 4. I'm going to hit authorize and it says API keys details entered. And that appears to have worked. So now if I go to my lists, ooh, what's going on down here? Some authentication requirements. That sounds like the details I was looking for. Whereas on the overview page, they seem to omit that. But when I go to this list.json, which I'm trying to get access to, it shows me, if I go down to the bottom, that I need to include my API key. Where do I include it? My query parameters. Well, we know query parameters actually go at the end here. We use a question mark, and then we say, all right, what does it need me to pass? It needs me to pass API-key. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And then get parameters, just like objects in JavaScript, have a key and they have a value. The key, they just provided to me right here, the parameter name. The value of that is going to come from my app's API key. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say equals, and I'm going to put in my API key. Then I'm going to hit send on that. And look what I get back, a list of all the information that I need access to. So in documentation, oftentimes you need to reference multiple pages. This overview is giving us a good start, but really what I had to do is go to this lists.json in order to get the list of everything. And then I went down and saw the authentication requirements, which led me to going up to my apps and generating my API key. Does anyone have questions about testing that before we get into our actual code? Okay. So we've got this all working and it's returning out the list name, the display name, the list name encoded, all kinds of stuff. But I still don't have my books. Why don't I have books included in this?
Is it nested deeper?
It is not. We got all the results here, and unfortunately, I don't see any books.
Yeah, me neither.
So we don't actually know why we're not getting out books yet. Let's go back to the New York Times, and like many APIs, we actually have to snoop around in their documentation to figure it out, because it says get New York Times bestsellers lists and look up book reviews. So I'm going to click into this, and I see my list showing up, but I don't see the books themselves. So what we can try and do is dig in a little deeper. So here it says, hey, I can get out not only the names of everything, but I can get the current latest list. But it uses, instead of list names JSON with our API key, we say current and then hardcover fiction. Okay, well, where's hardcover fiction coming from? If we go look, hey, this list name encoded looks a lot like our hardcover fiction over here. So it's almost like we need to make two API calls. One to know what all the possible lists are, and two, to be able to get the books in that list. Okay, with all of that said, I'm going to make a new call. And instead of going to the lists names, I'm instead going to go to current. And then I'm going to pass in the name of the list that I'm looking for. So I'm going to go back to my first API call. I'm going to pick some random one, advice, how to, and miscellaneous. And I'm going to paste that in to my URL. And I'm going to hit send on that. And now, oh, look, there's my advice, how to, and miscellaneous. And if I scroll down, here are my books. And there's all kinds of information on this book, like the image and the Amazon product URL. And there is also, somewhere in here, there is the title, Atomic Habits. Okay, now if I scroll down to the next one, I see that there is another one that says Go to Dinners by Barefoot Contessa, one of my favorites. Ever need a gravy recipe? Ina Gardens is fantastic. Okay, so we had to make two different API calls. The first one is getting us a list of all of the book lists, all the bestseller lists. The second one is allowing us to pass in which list we want to include the books down here. Do we have any questions about Postman or the API docs, or kind of figuring out how we can get this data testing and working in Postman?
So to get the books, you just had to redirect the path in the URL?
Correct. We used the first API call, used the list name encoded, copied that, went to our second API call and used that list name encoded with the current endpoint in order to get all of the books in the list.
Okay. So it was like a whole separate path then. It wasn't even the first one.
Yep.
Yeah.
We had to use the results of the first one, however, to make the second one work.
Ah, gotcha.
So I have a stupid
The
question.
results of the first one. Sorry, I didn't. We talked at the same time. I'm just like, wait, what were the results of the first one then?
The results of the first one were all of the lists that we get access to.
Right.
So combine print and ebook fiction, combine print and ebook nonfiction, hardcover fiction. We then take that list name encoded, depending on which list we want, and make another API call using that encoded list name as part of the URL to get the books inside that list.
Okay. Thank you.
No
Sorry.
problem. Or Charles,
No, no
go ahead.
problem. All right, so with the second API call, when you pick that one book, did you know it was going to bring up a list of other books, or is it just guesswork?
You know that only because in the documentation, the first one we used was list names.json. So if we go look at the list names.json, what it's showing us is, hey, this is what the example result looks like. And this example result has the list name encoded in it, which is helpful, but it doesn't have the books in it itself. So I'm like, all right, I'm not getting the data that I want yet, because the homework assignment says make all the books show up, right? So
Right.
now we're like, all right, well, how do we do that? So what I need to do is I need to come over here and go, all right, what looks like I'm going to get more details about that? Well, whenever we see these curly braces, they're trying to say, hey, there's more, you can put the list name in there and more information will come back. So I'm going to snoop around in their documentation a little bit and see, hey, this date right here is a parameter in the path. Well, if it's a parameter in the path, that means that it's before the question mark, right? It's not a get parameter. So they're telling me, hey, I can use current instead of having to pass in today's date. And then it's telling me, hey, you also need to pass in the list here. Well, where do I get the list from? It's saying it's the name. You can get the full list of names from the list names.json service. Oh, wait a second. The lists names.json has everything that I need in it. So if I follow that and put those two together, if I use that name here, I am able to get out all the books results that I need here. So the answer is going to be, hopefully, if it's well-written documentation, in the documentation itself. So even though I got started with this list.json, if I thought, wait, this doesn't include all the information that I want, I could read through the other options in here in order to find out, hey, this example response actually has the array of books that I'm looking for. So because of that, I know I need to combine this with this in order to get out what I'm looking for.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
It makes more sense, but I'm still not there yet.
Okay. So basically, either place you start, if you start with this list.json, the very first thing in the list, you can scroll down, look at the example, and say, actually, it was an overview. The first thing they say is lists name.json. So if I look at the data that's coming from that, once I get my API key working, I see this has all the lists in it, but not the books.
Right, the different categories, like
Yes.
hardcover fiction, combined print. Yeah, right, I got that.
So we look at this and we go, but there aren't books in there. That's kind of the whole point, right? Is that we say, all right, I want the books in this category.
Right.
So we go back, we look at the documentation and we say, okay, what else do we have in here? There's this list data. Okay, well, that's helpful. We needed the list name. But if we use this list data, we have to include the name of the list that we want the data in. So we say, hey, we're going to make another API call. We're going to pick any list from here. And we're going to use that in our second API call here. And when we run that, we get the array of all the books out.
Question, where did you find that a second API call, the advice to? 'Cause
List data is right here. And it's giving me details of that. Or you can go to lists data list.json, and that will also have all of the data in it that we need here.
Okay, so how were you able to find the advice how to? On the Postman, advice dash how to a,
Oh, that says list required.
okay,
And then in the documentation, it says name of the bestsellers list. You can get the full list of names from the list names.json service. That was the first API call that we made over here.
right, but I'm talking about the second one.
So we take any of the results from this one
Uh-huh.
and
Gotcha.
use it in this one.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's
No
why I was
problem.
confused.
And you know, I just realized, Max, the list name you picked, it's a list name. To me, it looked like a book title. So that's what gave me my confusion. You didn't pick the say hardcore
Hardcover fiction.
hardcover fiction, right? But you picked up those actual book title. I'm like, so how did he get that from a book? All right, see, now it makes more sense. Now I'm comprehending. Let's
So
call
if
it an aha moment.
If we call it the hardcover fiction and hit send on that, then we get back that category.
Right, and that would have made more sense to me initially, but the one you picked looked like a book title to me.
Sorry.
No problem. No
That
problem.
that is an important distinction though, right? Because when you say like, oh, we're working with the lists, you're like, oh, so an array. It's like, well, yeah, but what we're working with is the best selling lists, right? And the New York Times doesn't just say, here are the best sellers. They say, here are the best sellers in this category or list, to get that information back out. So this is a list of best sellers by category.
Got it.
So we spend so much time on this because once we get it working here, it's much easier to move that into our code. So we need to think about, hey, before we actually write any code, what's our user experience going to be? Because what I'm worried about is if we make this first API call, there are 59 different lists in this API call. Well, if we do all 59 of those lists and then go look at and see, hey, there are 15 books in each category of list, that's going to be a metric fuck ton of books to show, right? We probably don't want to show all of them. We need to think about our user experience. So yes, I could make you guys go back to Figma and design a user interface, but we'll try and keep it a little simpler. Why don't we give the user an option to select one of the 59 different lists? And once they select one of the lists, we'll show them the books inside of it. Does that sound good to everyone?
Sorry, tangent. Would it crash if we try to upload that many anyways?
No.
It wouldn't? Oh,
No.
it goes through.
I believe what Ryan put for us to put down is the top 5 of each rank. The top 5 rank from each category.
Cool. So we will do that. Still going to do my select idea though, right? Because I don't want all the books of all 59 categories to show up. I want the user to say, you know what? I hate nonfiction books. Just give me the fiction. Give me the good stuff, right? Or whatever category they want to pick. So we're just going to get that first API call working, and then we're going to go on our 7 p.m. break. So I've got the information here. I know what I've got showing up here. Now we got to move this over to our code. So for now, I'm kind of done with documentation. I'm going to go back over to my tab. I'm going to pop open my code again. And I'm in my script.js, and I know, hey, I need to make an API call. What function do we use to make an API call?
Fetch.
we do use fetch. And because I am a fan of async await more than .then in promises, I'm going to make myself a little async function that I can call await in. And I'm going to say const list response equals a fetch, await a fetch to where. Well, I'm going to go back to my Postman. I'm going to take my URL and I'm just going to dump that sucker right in. Okay, now from there, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to console log my list response. I come over here and I get my response and I'm like, that's cool, 200. That means it worked. Okay, true. Everything's good. What's going on with my body? Oh, readable stream. Ew. That doesn't have in it what I want. But I know this is going to be JSON. What happens if I say, hey, my const list data is going to come from my list response, parse it out as JSON, then log out my list data. Okay, I come over here. Now I have my status okay, copyright. Ooh, results. That looks like what I want. You pop that open. Bam. There are all my lists. Okay, but they're nestled in here. Every time I clicked in somewhere, I was going one level of the onion deeper, peeling that back. So I want to make sure that that's going to work for me. So first time I clicked, it opened up and it gave me my results. So let's narrow down on those results because I don't care about the copyright or the status or any of that. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to log out like list data.results. Come over here, boom, I'm one level deeper. All right, now I'm going to click in one more, and that's going to give me access to this array. Well, it's an array. What do we know about arrays? We usually have to loop through them. So I'm going to say for const list of list data dot results. And what do I want to log out? I want to log the list name, probably the display name. And I'm also going to need that list name encoded. So I'm going to say console log list.dot display name. Is it a underscore? Good. Underscores are easier. And I'm also going to console log out the list name encoded. Okay, so we've got all of that data working in our console. And we're like, all right, this is good. But what did we say we wanted to do with this? What's the user interface that we're trying to build?
Be able to select whether it's fiction or nonfiction.
Exactly. So we're going to say, hey, we're going to add a select in here. And that ID is going to say list selector. Then we're going to come over here and say, hey, I'm going to let my options equal an empty string. And every time we see a new list, we are going to add into our options a template literal with the option and the list.display name. And we're going to close that option tag off. And once we're done generating all the options, we're going to document get element by ID. We're going to get our list selector, and we're going to set the inner HTML of that equal to the options we just generated up here. So I save that. I come over here. Woohoo! Boom. All of my lists are now showing up in my dropdown. Pretty cool. Made my fetch request. I got the JSON. I parsed out of it. I logged out my data and realized I needed to peel back and get into the results. Once I got into the results, I realized that all of those results were an array, giving me all the lists. So I looped over all of the lists. And every time I found a new list, I created an option tag for it and included the display name. Then I stored all of that in my empty option string. And once I got down to that, I was able to take everything that I generated and save that into our inner HTML. That made everything show up in here. So before we go on break, what's the next step? Because whenever we go on a break, whenever we step away from our code, we always want to remember where we left off. So what do we want to do when we get back?
Leave notes.
Leave notes. What are we going to leave the notes on? What do we want to accomplish after break? We got our list. We've got this showing up. We can pick one of them. Now what?
Names of the books to display.
Yep. After selecting a list, show the top 5 books from it. So we need just a little reminder, hey, when we get back, where do we leave off? All of this is working. We're good on that. Now we just have to say when that list is selected, show the top 5 books. All right. Good work. I will see you guys at 7:25.
Hey, Max.
Yeah.
Just a quick heads up. I apologize for being late. I had to work later today. So I took overtime Wednesday and Thursday. All
right. So where did we...
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah. Go for it.
When is our check-in?
Capstone check-in isn't for another 2 weeks.
Okay. And do we have the meeting every Thursday that we have? I always forget what it's called. The one when we go in.
The what?
The meetup.
Oh, open hack.
Yes. I can't ever remember.
I believe that's oh crap. That I think is the second Thursday of every week, but we have a guest scheduled for that day. So I don't think we'll be attending open hack this week unless the date changes for it.
This month?
This month, yes.
Okay.
Speaking of that, next week, we are in person. We are in Gerwin Hall, Grewin Hall, room 408. The most important day to be in will be Thursday. So if you can only make it one day, make it on Thursday. AEI, the Alliance for Economic Inclusion, they're coming in. They are the ones who are footing the bill for all of you guys to go through the program. And they're coming in just to see the program and how it's going. So Thursday is going to be the most important day to be in, followed by Monday. Monday, we have Jay coming in, who is an attendee of Open Hack. He works at Red Hat, which is one of the largest open source software companies and a major contributing force behind Linux. And so he's coming in as a guest speaker about how to contribute to Open Hack and basically his experience in the software community. So Thursday's most important day, Monday is second most important, and then I will be there Tuesday and Wednesday as well. Totally up to you guys, encourage you to come, but tuning in remotely is also totally fine. With that said, let's dive back into our code. And oh, look at us. We left ourselves a little note. After selecting a list, show the top 5 books from it. Okay, well, we're over here. And when I refresh the page, I notice it's already filling in an option for me. I don't really want it to do that, right? I want the first thing to show up be a blank item. So I'm going to come back over to my script.js. And to solve that, I'm just going to put in a blank option tag. And that blank option tag will always be the first option and therefore the first option to load blank. Okay,
So I'm sorry. So mine doesn't look like that. Mine is a blank page. I don't know if I.
share your screen, let's take a look. Okay. Oh, nope. Your script list selector should be a select.
Oh, so
No. That's right, list selector, but the HTML element should be a select, not a script.
oh, a select. Okay.
Okay, well, it's a step in the right direction. Let's see what your JavaScript has in it. List may, comma, E.
Where? What line?
Display may, comma, E. Ma, comma, E. Line
What
11.
line?
Line 11.
Oh, line 11.
Also, Max, when I did my API fetch,
Mhm.
lists and then overview.json, and that gave me just the top 5 rank for each one.
So should it be display dot list dot display?
Display underscore name.
Okay, underscore name.
But what were you saying?
So the API fetch, when I
Yeah.
did API fetch that I was reading through all the APIs, I actually did the lists / overview.json, and that gives you just the top 5 rank on each category.
Oh, well, that's not as much fun. I'll show that at the end as another option.
So that didn't work either.
Pop open your console. Let's see what's going on in there.
Oh, in my console?
Yeah.
Just missing after argument list. Okay.
Line 4. You've got a string in there without the quotes. Pop open your console again. Okay, no errors. Let's go back to your code and take a look, see if anything jumps out at me. Parse the JSON, your list data results. Oh, you know what? You're missing on line 15 a set of opening and closing parentheses. That's what actually makes that function run, that async function. So if you do open parenthesis, close parenthesis right there, yeah, just like that, that's what's actually making that async function run.
So just leave it like that?
Yep.
And okay, cool. Thank you.
Work. No problem. Anyone else have questions before I dive in? Okay. All right, so we left off where our dropdown is now showing everything, but now we need to make our second API call, right? We need to say, based off of what they select in here, we want to do something else. So I'm going to go to my select ID and I'm going to say on change, say go run list selected, which is going to give me access to the event. So over here, I'm going to say const list selected is going to be some new function. Oops. And that's going to give me access to the event. And I'm going to console log out the event .target.value. So I come over here and I pick my book. I attempt to pick my book. and nothing happens. Const
The
list.
spelling of change is, I think.
Thank you. That's why we only do one console log before we get too far to test that. That was totally a test and you passed. Just kidding. You go to the select, we pick our book and we get the title out from it. Okay, that's cool. But if we go look at what's happening in Postman in our second API call, hardcover fiction is lowercase and has a dash in it. And over here, if we look, it has a space and is not case sensitive. So let's go back to our code. And if we look here, we not only had access to list display name, we also had access to list name encoded. So what we can do is we can embed that information, just like we put the display name in, we can also add in a value to our option. And our option is going to say list.list name encoded. Now, because we're passing that value in, when I pick that book, or that list, I now get it encoded the way I need it to. By default, HTML will use whatever is inside the option tag unless you provided it a value, and then it will use that value instead. So really what we're doing here is we're using the power of the template literal while we're generating out our options based off of the data in the results. So I'm just going to clean this up a little bit so it's a little bit easier to read.
Max, why do we want to see that encoded in our terminal?
Because if you look in our Postman for our second API call, look at the formatting of the list name. It's all lowercase with the dashes. So we need to know what got selected based off of the encoded list name, not necessarily the list name that we want to show to the end user.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Not yet, but thank you.
So if they picked advice, how to, and miscellaneous, this ampersand would actually break the second API call that we haven't made yet. So what we want to do is actually, when we make the call, make it to this format, not necessarily the format that gets displayed to the end user. So to show how that's working, I'm going to go back to my code. And in here, we now know that the const selected list is equal to the event target value. We also know that in Postman, based off of what list they selected, we want to go get the results from that. So I'm going to say const books response is equal to an await to our fetch. And instead of going to hardcover fiction, I want to go to whatever the selected list was. And now it's yelling at me. I'm using await, which means I need to put an async up here. And I'm going to say, hey, I know that the books data is going to come back as JSON. So take the books response and parse it out. And then finally, console log my books data. So I come over here, I clear everything out. I click my list. And in here, I now see, hey, I got 15 results. Inside those results, I've got an array of books. And inside those books, I've got all kinds of data about the book, including the author and the title. Okay, so every time we peel back that layer of the onion, we need to go a step further, right? So we're going to say console log books data. And the first thing I went into after selecting one, was the results. So I'm going to say dot results. I come back over here. I pick my list. Now inside of the results, I have dot book. books. So I'm going to say dot books. And now I get an array. Okay, well, what do we do with arrays? We want to get them showing up. So we're going to say for const book of books data dot results dot book console dot log my book. So I come back over here. I pick something, and now I get books data dot results dot book is not iterable. So I come up here and I see, oh, results dot books plural. So I need to fix that right here. Add that in, go back, I pick one, and now I've got all of my books. Pausing there. Do we have any questions how we got to this point so far? Okay, so we're going to do the same thing that we did up here, except now we're going to say let books HTML equal an empty string. And every time we go over a book, we're going to go to the books HTML and we're going to add to it a new div. And inside that div, we're going to include the book dot, comment that out so we can look at our data again. We're going to include the book dot title, the book dot author, and we're going to use that book image. So I'm going to say book dot title. I'm going to, in parentheses, put the book dot author. And then I'm going to include an IMG src that includes the book dot book image. And once I'm finally done dealing with all the books, I'm going to add a new div over here called results. And I'm going to, does not like my self-closing tag. I'm going to say document get element by ID. Hey, we just generated out all this HTML. Go grab the results ID and set the inner HTML of that to our books HTML.
The only thing that's a little iffy for me is just the brace for the books HTML. Why'd you put the braces around book.author?
The parenthesis or the braces?
Parentheses.
The parentheses just for formatting. I thought the author name would look good in parentheses. You could do this as like a dash instead if you wanted to. Doesn't really matter.
Okay, I thought like Arthur wouldn't show up because of the book title or something, but okay, gotcha.
Yeah, however you want to format it, it's fine. So I come over here, I pick my list, and now I get all my books showing up. So we can format that a little bit. We could say, hey, this is going to go into a UL tag. And once we're done with all the books, we're going to add the closing UL tag. And we could come in here and say each one of these is going to be a list item. And then we're going to put a break after the book title and the book author, and then we can add some styling on this to say the max width is going to be, I don't know, 75 pixels. And when we pick our list, we now get something a little bit more manageable. And if we wanted to, based off of the homework assignment, it does say only the top 5 books. So we could, if we are looking at our books, I noticed they all have a rank number built in. So I could come in here and say if the book.rank is less than or equal to 5, then add the HTML in for it. Otherwise, just ignore it. So now when I select something, I only get the first 5 books.
So cool.
Okay, so based off of popular demand, we're going to go through and comment this code, but I want you guys to interrupt me if you have any questions along the way. Before I get started, do you have any questions? So you don't even need to interrupt me.
Yeah, honestly, the backticks and
Yep.
more specifically though, the $ curly thing. I was playing around with the WoW API earlier, and yeah, so I kind of forgot what we use that for. Like I
Yeah.
see it working, but I don't understand it.
So the backtick curly braces, we only can use in a template literal, right? A template literal just means a fancy string where we can use this $ backtick about $ curly brace. So basically, if we said something like, let my str equal, and I say ABC plus, and I say const, actually, this is going to be a better example. I put my name in there, and then I want my string to say hi, and then the name, and then there. Right? This is using basic concatenation. If we console log out my str and we take a look in the console, we see hi. I did that in the wrong order. Hi there. Okay, now if we do that, we get hi there, Max, right? Pretty basic. First string, we concatenate or add on to the end of that string whatever the value of name is. Then we add in the parenthesis, the exclamation point at the end. However, oftentimes when we make a string, we want the value of whatever's in it to be automatically included in the string without having to end the string, add something in via concatenation, and then start a new string. So the other way we can write this is we can say, let my str equal a template literal. In other words, backticks. Then we can say, hi there, and put in name inside that template literal. In other words, pause the execution of the string, go get the value of name, and drop that in where the $ curly braces are. So this and this are going to produce the exact same output, except this is just a cleaner, easier way of getting the value in. In other words, this is the template, and the literal is going to execute out to be the same thing as this.
And $ curly braces is could that be considered as part of template literal as well? Like
It
with
is template literal syntax, yes.
syntax for it. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. That was
So
good.
that outputs the same if I get the same thing out of it. So this and this code are exactly the same. This is just kind of a shortcut way to add in values of our variables without having to break up the string and use concatenation.
Understood.
Any other questions? Okay, before I go in and comment all of this, Alba made a really good point of sometimes, even though you got it working, doesn't necessarily mean that we got it working in the most efficient manner, right? So if we come over here, we're making 2 separate API calls. When the page first loads, we've got to go get all of the lists. And then based off of what list they select, we then go make another API call to the current API endpoint, right? We use 2 different ones. But Alba pointed out, if you go take a look at the overview, not only are they going to include the list that we're looking for, it also includes the book directly in it. So even though our code is completely functional and meets the requirements of the assignment, it actually would have been more efficient to go directly to this overview.json and make one API call that included all of the books. So just to show you the sometimes API developers structure their data in a more efficient way of how you want to use it. So it's worth looking at different endpoints to figure out what you can and can't do with them. So while there's nothing wrong with this answer, it is slightly less efficient than than using one API call directly. Okay, so let's
So
break. Oh,
You're
go
saying
ahead.
overview.json has the books in the way we
Yes.
want it already?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so let's comment this out. I'm going to take out my console log hello. I'm going to say create async function so we can use the await keyword. Make API call to ny times to get the list of best to get all the best seller list categories.
Question. Is fetch in itself a promise, or are they two separate things?
Fetch always returns a promise.
Fetch returns a promise. Okay.
And then we deal with that promise with the await keyword, so we don't have to use the dot then.
Yeah, that's only when you're doing async though, right?
Correct. When
Yeah.
you name this async, you can use the await.
Gotcha.
Await, you
So
can anything you can do with a promise with dot then, you can do with an async and an await. Basically, the async is what we call a wrapper around promise. It's just a new syntax that allows us to deal with those promises.
I thought fetch and promise were on the same for a bit. That got confusing.
No, promises, you can definitely return or use promises without using fetch, but a fetch will always return a promise. So from here, we parse the response into parse the JSON response from ny times into an object. Log the object out and start peeling back the layers. Create placeholder for options.
Object
that-
was spelled wrong. There you
I quite like my objects a lot.
go.
All right, create a placeholder for the options that includes an empty option. So when the page loads, it stays blank. Then we are going to say loop over each list in our results. Generate the option using value and display name in a template literal. After looping through each object, each list, put the generated options HTML into the select. Event listener for when the dropdown changes. Get the encoded list name out of the option value. Make API call to get books on books from selected list. Parse the JSON from the books response. Peel back the object until we make it down to books array. Placeholder for our results. Loop over all books in the list. If books rank is under 5. Generate HTML using data from API in template literal to form HTML syntax and put our generated HTML into the div. I will share this code, but not until you guys submit your homework assignments, right? This is meant to be a crutch, not a answer, right? So hopefully this got you unstuck a little bit. How are we feeling about this?
I believe there's like a couple of different ways to do it with this one generating itself. And then if it's easier for some people to do it with the HTML and CSS and then just add the books into that, it could also be done that way. Or you could do it both ways and then commenting one out just so they could get the practice on putting the information or actually practicing the information.
Yeah, one thing that you could do, we really, the homework assignment, we do really want to see you generating the HTML. While it's good to get practice with it, one step that you could do is if you're kind of struggling to pull this apart, you could do something like, hey, I'm going to console log out the book here and go to my console and see, okay, here's all the data, right? So I could do something like this. I could copy the author, go over to my HTML, make a new div and say, all right, list item, what's going to show up in my list item? The author's name is going to show up. And then I'm going to go over and get the title. I realize I'm mixing things here, but all right, let me go get the title. And I'm going to paste that in. And then I'm also going to go get the image for that. And that's the book image. And I'm going to add in my line break and my IMG and my SRC and paste that in. And that is going to make everything show up. So that is good practice because what you can do is say, all right, now that I've got all of this working over here, let me go try and convert that into some HTML over here, right? And that may be an easier way to get practice of understanding how we get the book author and the book title, how we dynamically generate that based off of something we manually generated over here. But for the purpose of the homework assignment, we definitely want you guys using it and generating it dynamically. And the reasoning behind that is because in 5 years from now, when you go back to use this New York Times assignment, if their API doesn't change at all, this will still work. This will still pull up the top 5 most recent books from any of those lists, right? So while manually generating out the divs over here is going to show the same data now, it is going to be much better to generate it dynamically. What we just did over here is called hard coding, right? It's using that data and kind of formatting it out ourselves. But this is, while it is more technical, it's a much better approach to have that data automatically be generated and always be up to date.
For a while, I would always struggle with not the generation mail, but like how it would populate on the page. Like for example, if you go back to the browser
Mhm.
and then all the books and whatnot, yeah, I wouldn't understand how that would go about. So do you want to explain that for me?
This
Like-
section of code, you mean?
No, up to the console log books data. Is that what's populating the books on the browser?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So the book's data, if we look at what's console logging out on that, if I scroll up to 41, you can see it's an array. We know it's an array because it's telling us how many items are in the array and that it's a square brace, right? So if we pop that open, we know we want to say, go over all of these books. And when we go over all those books, what do we want to show up for each book? So I pop that object open and I see the author, the book image, and the title down here. So I know those are the 3 pieces of information that I want to show up for each book.
I'm probably making this overly complicated, but how are we able to access the books without using any bracket notation? Dot notation worked fine, obviously, but yeah.
So we're always able to use dot notation as long as the key does not include a number or a space.
Oh, okay.
So dot notation is always preferred over bracket notation because it's less symbols that show up in your code. We try to reserve bracket notation for accessing indexes in arrays unless we're using either a variable to access a dynamic key in the object or the key that we're accessing has a space in it or starts with a number.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
So we peeled it back to get to the array of books. And then we say, what data do we want to access inside that book? The title, the author, and the book image. And then we say, hey, loop over all those books up here.
Yeah, I was just gonna say you made the console log into a function. You turned it into books data and the results and whatnot.
This isn't a function, it's just a loop.
Just a loop. Okay.
It's a block of code because it uses the curly braces, but a block of code and a function are separate. This is a function up here.
Gotcha.
This is just
Word
a
being the
loop.
const, right?
What?
I said keyword being the const. That's how I can tell.
The equal arrow is what makes it a function.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions about this? Did I get at least someone unstuck who tried to do the assignment?
Yeah, I think this helps because before I thought we had to connect the 2 APIs somehow, like link them, and I didn't understand how one was going to know that the other one existed.
Yes. Yep. We make the first API call. We present that all to the user. And then from that one, based off of the list selected, we take whatever the user interacted with and selected and make a second API call to make all of this show up.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, thank you.
All right, so give me 1 second. I'm going to give you guys the option. You guys have an option of where to go next. We can either spend the next 25 minutes moving this over to React. If we don't pick that option tonight, we will pick up there tomorrow. The other option is to kind of use the last 25 minutes of class as an open office hours. And you guys can try this. If you have any questions, I can help you out. But it's up to you guys. If we choose not to do it in React tonight, we can start there tomorrow, or we can use that last 30 minutes and give you guys a chance. Poll is open. Please, please, please vote. Ten out of 15 votes in, 13, 14. Oh, so close. Thank God there are only 15 of you because that was a very close vote. We will do this in React next. Democracy wins here. However, if you are struggling with this is a homework assignment that I am very surprised that anyone can complete without using a one-on-one. So if you guys are stuck on this, if you guys want help, this has been a homework assignment since cohort 1. It is not just me. All of your TAs have been through this and completed this homework assignment. So if you need help on this assignment, please schedule a one-on-one. I am available. I'm happy to help. If you would prefer to do it with a TA, do it with a TA. If you prefer to do it with Ryan, do it with Ryan. That's totally fine.
Is that,
Oh,
sorry,
oh,
is that homework number 12 from homework number 12?
I
The
believe
New
so.
York,
Yes.
okay, okay,
Yes.
cool.
And so I will post the comments that I left in there and kind of delete out my code so you guys can take a stab at that. But we do use that project, the New York Times project, as kind of a midterm assignment, right? We use that to gauge, hey, can we take everything we've learned so far and apply that? So I think only 5 people have turned it in so far. If you do need help, reach out. We are here to help you. But with all of that said, I am going to show you how to do this in React. If you would prefer to turn this homework assignment in React, you can. If you've already completed the assignment, you do not need to redo it. But this is a really good practice because coming up, you guys have been building a lot of HTML. It would be helpful to know how to convert some of that HTML over to your React code. So that's what we're going to start with. I don't know if we're going to be able to finish this, but we will give it our best shot. I'm going to head to the terminal. I'm going to, if you want to follow along at this point, you can, but you don't have to. I'm
You're
going
not
to,
sharing.
there we go. I'm going to ls, and I know I want to get to my desktop, so I'm going to cd to my desktop. I'm going to cd into my C4 my code. I'm going to cd into my week 14. And I am going to ls on that. I see I've got day 1 already created. If you are struggling with all those CDs, you can type in CD space at any level, go into Finder, grab your day 1 folder and drop it in and hit enter. And that will also bring you down to whatever folder you are trying to get into. And then we are going to npx, X is always for execute, create -react -app, and we are going to call this ny times -react. While that's loading, I'm going to grab my ny times react folder and drag that right into my VS Code. And we sit and talk about the rainy day and how it's not snow and how glad we are while we wait for terminal to finish creating our React app.
We're not out the woods yet. We're getting snow again.
Would be disappointed if we didn't. Okay. Once our React app is done getting created, we can actually close out of our terminal. I'm going to right click in my package.json. I'm going to open an integrated terminal and I'm going to run npm start. That's going to bring me to my spinning React logo. I will also do a live share on this. If you guys want to pop that open, you're more than welcome to. And I'm going to give everyone just a minute to catch up in case they need it.
What do you have to type to create the React file?
It is going to be npx create -react -app and then the name of the app, which I called ny times -react. Just send it in Slack as well. And if all is going well, you should have your spinning React logo after running npm start. Anyone need another minute before we dive in? Okay. So in my SRC folder, I'm going to go to my app.js. I'm going to go ahead and clean out my div, delete the whole header, and that's where I'm going to get started. So we have used React before. Does anyone know what hook we have already used? Use hooks, they're built into React. The hook that we have used is use state. That's just a built-in function that allows us to hook in to React's native functionality and get access to state. However, we want to use a different hook. We still are going to use state, but we're going to use a hook called use effect. And use effect is really cool because you can tell it, hey, whenever a piece of data changes, I want you to go ahead and rerun this code. Use effect is also helpful for us to say, hey, when this page first loads, go run this code. But when the page refreshes or anything changes, don't rerun this snippet. That is really helpful for when we need to make an API call in a React component. In other words, saying when the first time this component shows up, go make the API call. After that, don't worry about it. So what we're going to do is we're going to say use effect. Use effect is going to go run a function. And then for the most important part, we're going to put an empty array here. That empty array is signifying we only want this use effect to run when the component first loads. From there, we're going to lean on the JavaScript code we already wrote for our fetch. So I'm going to switch over to my async call, and I'm actually going to take all of this function and move it in to my React. From here, I'm going to say, okay, make the API call. That's the fetch. I still need to parse the data. But I come in here and I'm like, whoa, we never use inner HTML in React. I took a little too much code there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete out everything up until this list data results. So we're doing our fetch. We're parsing out the JSON. We're logging out our results. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to come over to my React app, go to my console, and I see all my results are in there. I'm going to pause and poll just to see where you guys are at, because I know it's the end of the night and I want to give you guys a chance, a fighting chance to follow along. Oh, I did the wrong poll there, didn't I?
Still did the wrong one.
Still did
Yeah,
the wrong one. Yeah.
There we go. All right, most of you were voted in. Does anyone need help up until this point? You should, if you go over to your console in localhost 3000, you should be able to see the list of all the New York Times books. All right. So I'm going to come back over here. Now, we know whenever we have data that needs to update the user interface for the end user, we need to store that somewhere special. Where do we store data that gets displayed to the end user in React?
And props,
Not in props, but related.
components. Am I wrong?
Is it state?
State. State is the special kind of variable that we use that whenever it includes data that's going to get shown to the end user, we store it in state. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say const lists and set lists is equal to use state. And that's going to start out as an empty array. It's going to be an empty array because when it loads, we don't know what all of those lists are going to be. We then are going to come down here and we're going to say set our lists to our list data dot results. Now, if I save that and come over here and refresh, nothing really happens. We got our console log out here. It looks like this is working. What do we need to do to get this drop down to show?
It's an options input type or select.
It is. It is going to be both a select, and inside that select, we are going to use our lists, which we used up here, and we're going to map over each one to get us access to each individual list. And what are we going to return out? We're going to return a value, an option with the value of list dot, and I'm going to cheat and go back to my vanilla JavaScript, and it's list name encoded. And what's going to show up inside that option is going to be the list dot display name. And I come over here. Ooh. That's got everything in it. Well, that was certainly a lot simpler. I didn't have to do generated options. I didn't need to pass in all kinds of information. I just looped over my lists directly and generated out all the options I wanted. Now I can throw in an empty option up here so that when it loads for the first time, it stays blank. And in here, because I'm mapping over something, I really should include a key. And it looks like the list name encoded is always going to be unique. So from there, I can just add a key on this that says list.list name encoded. And that should get rid of my warning message here saying, hey, whenever you loop over something, you should always include a key with it. Pausing there, do we have any questions about how this is working in React?
No, but this is so much easier than doing it the other way.
I bet one person would think the opposite. I don't need to know which person it is, but there's always someone who goes, the vanilla JavaScript, I understand it more. Okay, believe it or not, we can finish up this entire React app in the next 10 minutes. All we need to do is on our select, say on change of the select, we want to say list selected. Well, we need to say, hey, when the list is selected, we are going to have an async function. And we need to know what list they selected. Well, we can get that from the event and console log out the event.target.value. So I come over here and I pick something and I get whatever they selected. Okay, well, if I go back to my vanilla JavaScript and go down to the list selected, I can actually take all this code right here and move that into my list selected. And I know my books data results books has all the information I need in it. So I'm going to come back up here. I'm going to add a new variable called books and set books. And I'm going to use state and make that equal to an empty array. Then I'm going to come down and I'm going to say, hey, instead of console logging out my books, what if we set our books to the books from the results from the books data? Okay, so now I can come down here and say under my select, I would like a UL. And I would like to take all of my books and map over them to get me access to each individual book. And each individual book is going to return out a list item that has the book.name, book.title. And I don't need my $sign there. And I would like it to also include the book.author. And finally, we're going to do a line break and put in an IMG with the source of the book dot book image. And we want to style that with a max width of 80 pixels. One thing to note, whenever you use pixels in React, you do not have to put px. It is automatically assumed to be pixels when you use that number. I come over here, I grab my list, boom. I don't like that they're all centered, so I'm going to go out and delete my app.css because I don't really want that stuff in there. And now I've got my list. Okay, I lied. We can do it in a lot less than 10 minutes. We did it in 4. So just like the important thing here is we say set up empty placeholder lists for results in state. Then use effect makes use effect only runs when the first time a component is loaded. Then we can come in here and say already commented, already commented, already commented. And we just say store results in list. Then we say when lists are updated using set, automatically loop over each one to generate the HTML to make them show. We do the same thing down here. We say on select of list, make the API call, parse it out, and then set that into state.
Minor question. Does the color coding tell us anything like the green and blue bar on the sides?
Yes, the green bar is trying to tell you that this is all like the JavaScript half of the component, and then the blue bar tells you that this is the HTML portion of it.
Yeah, because I noticing the comments were different, so I was a little confused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, React comments are tricky because sometimes you need to use when you're in the JavaScript portion, you can use double slashes. But when you use comments in the HTML portion of your JSX, you do need to use the curly braces with the $sign star.
The command shortcut doesn't put in the curly braces for you this time around?
It does. If it's
Oh, it
on a
does.
blank line, it will put that in.
Okay.
All right. Do we have any questions about this React code? Got one more poll headed your way because I'm curious. Last poll for the evening. Which way did you prefer or understand more?
Vanilla only because JSX is kind of kicking my butt. That mixing of HTML and JavaScript is not it.
That is a very fair assessment. Last call to vote. Going once, going twice. See, Jennifer, I told you.
That's amazing.
I kind of want to know who picked React.
You know I did.
All right, are we feeling better about the homework? I know we spent a whole class going over this stuff, but are we feeling like we can tackle both the week 12 and 13 assignments now? Hopefully we're seeing the difference between vanilla JavaScript and React, starting to get a better feel of, hey, we can build the same things in both of them. The way we go about building them is a little different. React is certainly more geared towards web interaction, web apps, being able to get live data in and set format that, capture user interactivity. And as our apps grow and scale, React will become more and more important. So tomorrow we'll be back to the React grind, building a new project completely from scratch. But I'm really hoping that tonight's class gives you an opportunity to feel a little bit more confident about your homework and get that level of understanding. I will be posting the comments from all 3 apps that we created tonight. And if you get stuck on your homework, this YouTube recording will be up probably tonight, if not definitely by tomorrow morning. So you can go ahead and review that. One-on-ones are certainly available for you guys, but hopefully this gives you a chance to catch up on homework. And starting tomorrow, we'll start getting back into React review. All right. I will see you guys tomorrow. Have an awesome evening.
Have a good night, everybody.